I had her hands once, just briefly, like catching something that wasn't mine before it slipped back into the dark. And it shouldn't have mattered, but it does. It does so much I can't stop replaying it. It was late afternoon in the shop, one of those half-dead hours where the clock stutters and the air smells of old rubber, dust, and grease. The kind of place where conversation dies under the hum of fluorescent lights. I was bent under the hood of a stubborn sedan, half listening to the radio, when I heard her heels first. Not rushing, not careful, just steady, like she wasn't trying to impress anyone. When I looked up, there she was. Not what you expect in a repair shop, not really, mid-40s maybe, but not apologizing for it. She had this gray-blue scarf draped carelessly around her neck, the kind that looked like she didn't put it there for style, but because she just knew how to carry herself. And her eyes, sharp at first glance, but not unkind. More like they could take the measure of a room and decide in seconds whether or not it was worth her time. "Is anyone actually working here, or do you all just stand around listening to that radio?" she asked. There wasn't even a smile in it, but I laughed anyway. Too quick. Too much. I wiped my hands on a rag, pretending it mattered. "Depends on the kind of work you need done." She tilted her head, a fraction. The kind where the car doesn't rattle like it's about to shake itself into pieces. Something about her voice. It wasn't loud, wasn't soft. Just direct. Confident. Like she'd lived long enough to know what she wanted and wasn't here to barter. That confidence pulled at me in ways I didn't want to name. I walked her to her car. She stood close enough that I caught a faint trace of perfume. Something warm, not floral, not sweet. More grounded, like cedar or smoke. And when I reached for the door handle, my hand brushed hers. That was it. Nothing intentional. Nothing dramatic. Just skin against skin. But my stomach dropped, like I'd stepped off a ledge. She didn't flinch. Didn't pull back. Her eyes flicked up to mine, steady, almost daring me to look away first. I did. Of course I did. "Sorry," I muttered, fingers tightening on the handle like I had to prove I had a reason to be touching it. She didn't answer. Not right away. Just watched me. Then, with the faintest curve of her lips, "Don't be." And those two words, lodged themselves somewhere I haven't been able to shake. We talked about her car after that. Something about the suspension, maybe the brakes. I don't remember most of it. I just remember the way she leaned against the hood while I explained, arms crossed, listening like she already knew what I was going to say. Every time my words stumbled, she raised one brow, amused, like she could see through the cracks I was trying to hide. When she left, the shop felt emptier. The radio too loud. The air too stale. And the worst part? I didn't know her name until she signed the work order. Just 4 neat letters, written quickly, like she was already used to people noticing without her needing to say much. I've had her hands once, and it should have been nothing. Just a slip of a moment in a place where no one lingers. But I can't let it go. I keep waiting for the sound of her heels again, steady and unhurried, cutting through the dead air like she belongs here more than I do. She walked into the shop just as the rain started, steady drops on the tin roof, the kind that make every sound heavier. She leaned against the counter, damp scarf pulled loose, and for the first time I saw her without that careful poise she carried. Her hair was a little frizzed from the weather, her makeup smudged near one eye. It made her look less untouchable, more human. "I think you tightened it too much," she said, tapping the work order from last week. I blinked. The suspension? Her shrug was almost playful. "Or maybe I just like giving you something to fix." I smiled, but she didn't return it. She just rubbed her temple lightly, the way tired people do when they're trying not to show it. That small gesture caught me harder than her words. "Rough day?" I asked before I could stop myself. She glanced at me, sharp at first, then softer. Something like that. I wanted to ask more, but she looked away too quickly, eyes tracing the rain sliding down the window behind me. Guarded again, like she'd handed me one thread of herself and realized she shouldn't have. We walked to her car together. She kept her hands shoved into her coat pockets, and I noticed how her shoulders hunched just slightly, like she was holding the world there. And for the first time, I wondered who she was when she wasn't in control. When I bent to check the wheel, she crouched too, just close enough that I caught her laugh. Quiet. almost embarrassed, when her knee brushed mine. "I should leave this to you," she said, and it came out more vulnerable than she meant it to. "You don't have to," I said. Her eyes flicked to me again, searching, but then she straightened quickly, brushing invisible dust from her coat. "I do." That imbalance hung there. Me, wanting to stay in the small space she'd opened. Her, pulling back into herself like a tide retreating. When I finished, she thanked me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. But just before she turned to leave, she hesitated. Her hand rested on the car door longer than it needed to. A pause too deliberate to be accidental. I caught myself staring at her fingers, the same ones that had brushed mine that first day, pale against the metal, still, waiting. And then, without looking at me, she said softly, "You pay too much attention." The rain filled the silence that followed. She didn't explain, and I didn't answer. But the way she closed the door, slow, almost reluctant, felt heavier than anything she could have said. I watched her drive away, the red glow of her taillights fading into the wet evening. And for the second time, I realized I'd been given just enough of her to make me restless, but never enough to let me go. The storm came down heavier than I'd seen in months, sheets of rain hammering the shop roof like it was about to split. Most people had already cleared out by evening, and I was closing up when I heard her voice again, low and strained at the door. "You're still here." She stepped inside, dripping coat, hair damp at the edges. No scarf this time. Just her, less polished, more present. The storm had made her cheeks flush, and for once she didn't seem to care who saw her undone. "Yeah," I said, trying to sound casual, though my pulse jumped. "Couldn't leave with the rain like this." She gave a half laugh, the tired kind. "Me neither. My wipers quit halfway down the road." Figures. There was nothing for her to do but wait. So she sat at the counter while I made us coffee from the old machine in the corner. The shop was quiet except for the rain and the occasional pop of thunder. It felt like the outside world had been sealed off, and all that was left was her, sitting in that cracked vinyl chair, watching me. I slid the mug across. She wrapped her hands around it, holding the heat. For a second, her eyes softened. "Thank you," she said, but it came out quieter than usual, almost raw. We didn't talk much, just small scraps. She mentioned she used to come here years ago, back when someone else ran the place. I asked if she lived nearby. She shook her head. "Not anymore." Something about that "not anymore" stayed between us, heavier than the storm outside. She shifted, brushing a damp strand of hair from her forehead, and I found myself watching her hand too long. The small veins, the faint scar at the knuckle. Hands that looked like they'd carried more than they wanted to admit. I opened my mouth. God knows what I was going to say, but her phone buzzed across the counter. She froze, staring at the screen. The name lit up in bright, white letters I couldn't help but read. "Mark." She didn't answer, didn't even move at first, just stared. Then, finally, she flipped the phone face down, hard enough to make the mug rattle. Our eyes met. Her lips parted like she wanted to explain, but she didn't. Instead, she shook her head slightly, almost to herself. "I shouldn't be here," she whispered. The words sliced through me. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that it meant something, the way she came back, the way she lingered. But I stayed still, hands gripping the edge of the counter to stop myself from reaching for hers. The storm roared louder, lightning flashing against the windows. She stood then, too quickly, as if her body had decided before her mind did. But in her rush, her hand brushed mine again when she reached for the mug. Warmth jolted through me, familiar, unbearable. She looked up, right at me this time, eyes wide, conflicted. I thought she might say something, or step closer, or let the moment slip the way it wanted to. But she only exhaled, slow and shaky, then pulled her hand back. The distance was instant. Final. Or it should have been. But my skin still burned with the ghost of her touch. The shop was nearly empty, just the two of us and the faint hum of the overhead lights. Outside, the evening had settled into that hollow gray, the kind that makes every shadow heavier, every breath louder. She leaned against the counter, arms crossed, staring at nothing in particular. I didn't move, didn't know where to start. The tension between us had stretched itself thin over weeks, Small gestures, stolen glances, hands that lingered too long, and now it felt like it had a weight of its own. Finally, she spoke, voice low, almost trembling. Do you ever wonder why this is so complicated? I swallowed. My throat felt thick. All the time, I admitted. I didn't add because I can't stop thinking about you, though I wanted to. She shifted, letting one hand fall to the counter. I noticed the small tremor in her fingers, the faint pressure she pressed against the wood as if it could hold her together. She looked at me then, and it was different. Not teasing, not guarded, just real, vulnerable. What are we doing? She asked, words barely above a whisper. The question hit me like a hand to the chest. I wanted to laugh, wanted to answer confidently. Instead, I felt frozen, tangled in my own desire and the impossible lines drawn between us. I don't know, I said finally. Her eyes softened, but not in relief. More like sadness, like she'd been waiting for me to say something that could explain the ache she carried. Because I can't pretend this is normal anymore, she said. Her voice cracked on the last word. I wanted to reach out, touch her, erase the confusion in her eyes. But I didn't. I stayed where I was, hand hovering over the counter, caught between wanting to act and fearing it would ruin everything. She let out a breath, slow, almost a sigh. Her gaze drifted, not entirely avoiding mine. I thought I could keep it contained. Keep it harmless. Harmless. I echoed, heart tightening. It's not harmless. Not for either of us. She blinked rapidly, the weight of unsaid things pressing on her chest. Then, in the kind of silence that says more than words ever could, she pressed both hands to her face and leaned against the counter. I don't want to ruin everything, she whispered. That was it. That was the line between us and something that could no longer be ignored. And yet, despite the storm of emotions crashing in the small space between us, she didn't move closer, didn't pull away. She just let the truth sit there, heavy, jagged, impossible to shift. I wanted to say something that would make it all easier, something that would untangle the threads of longing, regret, and hesitation. But no words could do that. So I stayed silent. We just looked at each other, long, aching, searching. And then she finally spoke, voice breaking through the quiet like a confession I wasn't ready for. I don't know if I can do this anymore. And in that single line, everything we hadn't said crashed into me. Hope, fear, desire, and the impossible ache of wanting someone you shouldn't. The next evening, she came back to the shop, not with a car, not with a problem to fix, just herself, a little fragile at the edges. The storm had passed, leaving streets glistening under streetlights, reflecting every droplet like tiny secrets. She leaned against the counter, quiet. I noticed immediately, there was a weight in her shoulders I hadn't seen before, something that wasn't just tiredness or rain. She held a small envelope in her hand, edges soft from handling it too much. I found this, she said, voice low, almost like she was talking to herself. She handed it over without explanation. It was a photograph, a younger version of her, smiling but with that same guarded gaze I had come to know, standing next to a man I didn't recognize. Her fingers brushed the corner, lingering longer than necessary. I lost him, she said finally, almost too quietly. A long time ago. I wasn't ready, or maybe I thought I was, but life didn't wait. Her eyes met mine, glimmering, raw. I think part of me is still waiting for that to make sense. I wanted to say something comforting, but I stayed silent, letting her words hang between us. I didn't know what to do with the sudden fragility, the weight of a past heartbreak laid bare in such a simple moment. You remember my nephew? She asked suddenly, almost changing the subject. The one I told you about when we first met. I nodded. Yeah. I think sometimes he reminds me of him, she said, glancing down at the photo again. Small things, laugh, the way he tilts his head when he's curious. It's stupid, but it catches me off guard. I reached for her hand, just an inch closer, but stopped halfway. Instead, I let my fingers hover, trembling slightly. I wanted to offer reassurance, but anything more would be too much, too soon. She exhaled slowly, looking at me now, her eyes soft but searching. I'm not saying this for sympathy, she murmured. I just needed someone to know. The vulnerability in her voice made the air thick. I realized I had never seen her like this, completely unguarded, unshielded. And yet, it wasn't melodrama. It was real, human. I swallowed, caught between wanting to reach across and the fear of breaking her already delicate composure. "Thank you," I said finally, "for trusting me." She let out a small laugh, half bitter, half shy. "Trusting you, or just talking?" "Maybe both," I admitted. She didn't answer, just pressed the photo back into her coat pocket and adjusted her scarf. Her hand lingered on the counter for a heartbeat longer than necessary, brushing mine again, soft, fleeting, impossible to ignore. When she finally stepped back to leave, the shop felt emptier, but in a different way than before. Not just absence of her body, but absence of what had shifted, what had been revealed. Something had changed, quietly, seismically, between us. And I couldn't stop thinking about the way her hand had hovered over mine, like it had left a small, invisible mark on the space where I stood. It was late afternoon when she came back again, this time not because of a car or a favor, but because she had nowhere else to go for a few quiet hours. The shop smelled faintly of oil and coffee, the soft hum of fluorescent lights wrapping around us like a protective bubble. We didn't speak at first. She leaned against the counter, eyes tracing the shadows on the floor, and I sat across from her, legs stretched, hands clasped loosely in my lap. The silence wasn't empty. It was heavy with everything we hadn't said and everything we'd admitted in fragments over the past days. Her fingers brushed the edge of the counter, close enough that I could feel the warmth through the wood. I didn't move, didn't reach, but I didn't pull away either. I could see her noticing, small micro-expressions flickering over her face. Hesitation, fear, curiosity. Finally, she spoke, voice quiet, almost unsure. "I keep thinking, if we act like this is normal, maybe it will feel normal." I swallowed, heart tight. "Maybe it already does," I said. Not words of romance. Just acknowledgement. Just truth. She laughed softly, a sound that was part relief, part disbelief. "You're impossible," she said. And it wasn't a complaint. It was recognition. We moved closer without deciding. Not consciously, but our space shifted, a fraction, imperceptibly. Our shoulders nearly brushed when she leaned forward, elbows on her knees, staring at the floor. I leaned too, my hands resting on my thighs. Her gaze flicked up for a second, long enough to meet mine, and then away. The storm outside had finally faded. The world beyond the shop was quiet, but inside, the air between us had settled into something rare, understanding. Not confession, not declaration, just permission. Permission to exist together in this moment without pretense or restraint. Her hand moved again, slow and deliberate, brushing mine. Not a grasp, not a pull, just touch. The kind that anchors you, that confirms you exist in the same fragile bubble of time. I didn't pull away. She didn't push forward. We sat like that, small touches, quiet breathing, watching the light shift as evening approached. Every imperfection between us, the hesitations, the past regrets, the longing we couldn't name, felt like it had settled into the space naturally, without pressure, without need for explanation. At some point, her forehead leaned lightly against my shoulder. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a declaration. It was a small, human gesture that carried everything we had been unable to say aloud. Acknowledgement, acceptance, quiet surrender to the inevitability of connection. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. I felt her breath, warm and steady, the subtle tremor of her hand in mine, and it was enough. The day dimmed outside. The shop was quiet. And in that shared space, with no promises, no words of love, everything had shifted. The tension, the longing, the slow burn, they had become something real, earned, unshakable. And for the first time, I didn't feel the need to let go. Looking back now, it's strange how little actually changed, and yet how much. The shop smells the same, oil, dust, coffee, but the air between us is different. Not dramatic, not obvious, just settled. A quiet understanding, like two people finally letting themselves exist in the same world without forcing it. I think about her often, not in a way that aches anymore, but in a way that carries warmth, even when she isn't there. Her laughter, the way her fingers brush a surface absent-mindedly, the softness in her eyes when she thinks no one is watching, all of it is stitched into my memory. She taught me patience, the kind that comes from longing without expectation, from loving without possession. She has changed too, I think. Maybe not in ways anyone else would notice, but I can see it in her small hesitations softened into ease, in the quiet trust she allows in the space between us. The careful walls she built aren't gone, but they don't feel like barriers anymore. They feel like part of the rhythm we've learned together. Love isn't fireworks or perfect timing. It isn't sweeping declarations or cinematic gestures. It's the shared silence after a storm, the hand hovering over another's, the pause, the glance, the acknowledgement that says, I see you, and I'll stay here. I've learned that sometimes the most powerful moments aren't the ones that announce themselves loudly. They are the ones that quietly insist on being remembered, that fold themselves into your life without permission but leave you better for it. And sitting here now, in the fading light, I can still feel her hand near mine, her forehead brushing my shoulder. I smile, a small, private thing, because it doesn't need to be more than that. We don't need to define it. We only need to exist in it. It's strange to admit, but I wouldn't change a single second. The hesitation, the pull, the near misses, the storms, and the silent collapses into shared space. It all led here, a love that is real, earned, and quiet, the kind that stays in your bones without shouting for attention. And maybe that's the point. That love doesn't always need words. Sometimes, it just needs presence. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?